Subscribe our channel for latest news updates.
Washington Journal continues.
Well, joining us now in Houston, Texas is Kirsten West Savali, who is Associate Editor for Social Justice and Education at The Root. You can read the work there at theroot.com. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, the timing is especially apt here for your visit. We have some significant news in two police shooting cases from around the country. One not far from where you are. It's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the Advocate gives us this update this morning that the Baton Rouge Police Department has fired an officer who shot Alton Sterling. They write that after nearly 2 years of investigations and a public outcry over the fatal police shooting of Mr. Sterling, the Baton Rouge police chief fired one officer and suspended another as he pleaded with the community to heal the wounds and look forward. We've heard a lot about the story, but what's your reaction to the news out of Baton Rouge?
Well, I think what happens with Alton Sterling is that this should not be an HR issue. Of course, he should be fired. He should have been fired immediately after it happened. This is a crime against humanity. We should be able to call it murder, but we cannot, outside of the legal realm. But we live in occupied territory. James Baldwin told us that in 1966. Alton Sterling should still be alive. Nothing about that interaction with Officer Blaine Salamone should have occurred the way that it happened. And what we're seeing now is people who are exhausted with the repetitive, just taking, snatching, stealing of black lives in this way. Let's
go to Sacramento now as well. The Sacramento Bee, Kirsten West Savali, has this headline. They talk here about the shooting of Stephon Clark by police. This headline, Clark shot 6 times in the back. This from a private autopsy from the family. We have a little bit of video that we can look at while we talk about this particular case. What are your thoughts on the case out in Sacramento?
Well, again, what we're looking at is an execution. Stephon Clark was on his family's property. He was in his backyard. He was unarmed. He was shot in the back. They did not identify themselves. We have the same thing. It happens over and over and over and over again. There's always some justification, some reason why police officers feel compelled to shoot. And what we see is that they get away with it time and time again. So just as with Alton Sterling and so many others, Jordan Davis, Jordan Edwards, Raquel Boyd, there's so many people that we could name here, Tarika Wilson, Katherine Johnston, Eleanor Bumpers, that we can name where police officers feel they have the right to take lives, period. There was no reason for Stephon Clark to be killed in his backyard. There was no reason for Alton Sterling to be killed in front of the convenience store.
Why does this happen in the way it happens these days? And has anything improved since Ferguson?
Well, I don't think we can say these days. Let's talk about Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was assassinated by a state trooper in Alabama in 1965 with trying to get voting rights. We can talk about Larry Payne. This is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Larry Payne was 16 years old. He also had his hands up. They were also saying, don't shoot him. He was 16 years old, and he was shot by a police officer. So when we talk about what's happened since Ferguson, what's happened since then, what's happened since the inception of police departments. That is a continuum of slave patrols who were meant to bring enslaved black people back to plantation, where the crime was not the dehumanizing institutional violence of slavery. It was actually people seeking freedom, and they were meant to bring them back. So again, we're talking about occupied territories. We're talking about oppressed communities. We're talking about militarized police departments who have been given to right the kill with impunity. And it happens over and over and over again.
Kirsten West Savali is Associate Editor for Social Justice and Education at The Root, theroot.com. It's a digital magazine that provides commentary and news from a variety of perspectives. We're here to talk about police shootings and race in the U.S. We'll put the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for our callers. We look forward to hearing from you in this half-hour segment. Kirsten West Savali, we know what needs to change from what you're saying, but how to achieve change in what's happening in this country right now, these two particular cases and perhaps others?
How do we see change?
Yeah, how do you get to the point of change?
Well, there has to be a value. There has to be a recognition of the humanity of Black lives, and we're not going to see that at the rate that we're going. What we see now is this push for incremental change, that we must wait, you know what I mean? And there is also this idea that we have time. And time in and of itself, when we look at the police shootings and institutional violence, is racist in and of itself. Because who has time? Who has the time to wait? Who has the time to repeat trauma over and over and over again? And it's not just the shootings. When you look at sexual assault being the second highest reported form of police brutality, Black women in particular, Daniel Holtzclaw in Oklahoma, who raped 12 Black women and 1 Black girl, and we see this over and over and over again. So we get to change by recognizing that this is a white supremacist structure, this is institutional violence, and there has to be value placed on the humanity of Black and brown lives in this country.
Before we get to calls, wanted to show you an exchange between April Ryan of American Urban Radio and the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. This is from Wednesday, and they are well, let's watch, and then we'll get a reaction from our guest.
There were no charges against the police officers in the Alton Sterling police shooting. What does the president have to say about that, particularly as he is a strong supporter of police? And then you have the issue, we're in the midst of that issue that happened, that fatal shooting of the young man in California behind his grandmother's house with a cell phone.
Certainly a terrible incident. This is something that is a local matter, and that's something that we feel should be left up to the local authorities at this point in time.
What do you feel about that? He was strongly behind police. He supports police, as much of America does, but wants to weed out bad policing. What does he say about weeding out bad policing when you continue to see these kinds of situations occur over and over again?
Certainly we want to make sure that all law enforcement is carrying out the letter of the law. The president's very supportive of law enforcement. But at the same time, in these specific cases, in these specific instances, those would be left up to local authorities to make that determination, and not something for the federal government to weigh into.
Kirsten West Savali in Houston, a local matter, says the White House. What's your reaction?
Well, it wasn't a local matter when he said he was the law and order president. It wasn't a local matter when he was in Alabama and he said, back in his day, they would have been dragged out of there. It wasn't a local matter when he suggested that Black people were behind just a spate of police shootings in this country. He picks and chooses. He has time to tweet. He has time to get involved in all kinds of just ridiculous encounters on social media. But when it comes to the killing, the state-sanctioned executions of Black lives in this country, then it becomes a local matter. It's hypocritical. And it's in keeping with who he is. It's in keeping with who Donald Trump has always been, going back to the Central Park Five, going back to the fact that he is a slumlord. So this is not surprising for him. It's not surprising that he would be cowardly in that way. It's not surprising that he would just abdicate his responsibility to speak out on behalf of the people who he claims to be representing, but we know that's not the truth.
And that being said, what would be the federal role in this area of police shootings, and related race issues? What do you want to see from the federal government?
Well, I would like to see action as far as, under the Obama administration, there were all these reports done under Eric Holder's DOJ, and we still did not see police officers being charged with hate crimes. There were a lot of great reports. There were a lot of information. So at the very least, if you're supposed to represent this country, then you should be able to speak out on the violence that we see in these communities. At the very, very least, I believe that there should be police departments, first and foremost, that the money from police killing should not come from taxpayers. It should come from police departments. Even though when we say they're held accountable, even when these families receive settlements, it is not police departments who suffer. There needs to be a reduction in the militarized equipment that police departments has. We've seen some of that happen, but I don't think we've seen it enough. There needs to be a divestment from police departments. There needs to be a reinvestment in the communities who they occupy, and the federal government absolutely can play a role in that.
Let's go to calls for our guest who was in Houston this morning. Jean is calling first from Arcadia, Louisiana on the Democrats line. Hi, Jean.
Hi, John. Many say that all lives matter, and that is true, but it seems to me like many believe that Black lives doesn't matter. This is a national problem. This isn't a local problem. This is happening in all of the states of the United States. And this has been happening for many, many, many years. I'm 74 years old, and I know it has been happening ever since I've been in this world. These are hate crimes. When an armed policeman shoot an armed black man, that is a crime. That is a murder. And our president of the United States, he doesn't care because he is a racist himself. And, John, please allow me to say this because I called in and my call was dropped on the young people. And I wanted to say this. John, can you imagine a liar, a person that has the morals of an alley cat, a person who is a bully, a person who is a racist? Now, just imagine, this is what we have as a leader of these United States. Yet we question whether the young people have the awareness, the political awareness or not.
Jean, thank you for calling. Kirsten West Savali of The Root. Any reaction to what Jean said?
Well, I believe she's absolutely right, but we also need to, when we speak about black men, we cannot forget black women, particularly when we talk about unarmed encounters with police departments. 60% according to a new study from Fatal Interactions with Police that came out of Washington State, shows that 60% of black women are unarmed and fatally shot by police officers. So that is extremely important to remember when we talk about encounters with police departments and police officers across this country. Also, we need to talk about the fact that if they are armed, there has been a big push, particularly from the right, about the Second Amendment. So just because someone has a firearm does not mean necessarily they are dangerous. It does not mean that police officers have a right to shoot and kill them based on simply acknowledging that they have a firearm. Philando Castile had a firearm, and he told them he did, and he was shot and killed anyway. Jonathan Crawford was in a Walmart with a toy, and he was shot and killed. 911 was called on 12-year-old Tamir Rice over a toy gun that he was playing with in the park, and they did a drive-by on a 12-year-old child. So we can't really make that distinction between unarmed and armed in this country particularly, because just because someone is armed does not mean they have the right to steal their lives away.
Moving on to Scott now in Clearwater, Florida, Republican line. Hi, Scott.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I just think there's a lot of facts being left out here. First of all, Sacramento, that kid was he was the one being chased by a helicopter because he was a suspect for breaking into vehicles at night. And then also in the autopsy, the private autopsy, one of the first comments they said was he was shot first on the side, and that possibly caused him to spin around, so he got shot in the back. And then you move on to Louisiana, to Baton Rouge, and that guy, he's sitting in front of a Pickwick selling illegal DVDs. He had a gun on him, and he'd been seen in the video from the convenience store earlier, playing with the gun out in public. Which, first of all, I would never do that in a million years. But what I'm saying is I don't think these cops, no one's thinking about how scared they are when they walk into these situations. They don't go into it looking to shoot someone. They're looking at it for a criminal in the dark backyard. If I was in my grandmother's backyard and a police helicopter was chasing me, man, I'd put my hands right up because I'd be scared the cops were going to shoot me because they think I was some sketchy criminal. So I just don't think that all the facts are out there. I don't really think that enough consideration is going to the police officers.
That was Scott for Kirsten West Savali of The Root, who is in Houston. Not enough facts, he says. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. First of all, Stephon Clark was shot multiple times in the back, whether he had to spin whatever kind of fiction that your caller is creating in this situation. That was an execution. The police did not identify themselves. He was not seen running. They came into his backyard and they saw him and they did not identify themselves and they shot him. We see that. Alton Sterling, yes, he had a gun. Yes, he was in front of a convenience store. That does not mean he deserves to be shot and killed by a police officer. What we saw with Blaine Salamone is him immediately saying that he would shoot him in the head. He would shoot him in the head. He called him a stupid MF multiple times. Once he was on the ground, he said, leave the idiot like he is. Leave him there. They didn't need rope to even respect his body in death. So those are the facts. To even suggest, particularly from a Republican in this country, that, he had a gun at the store. He was sitting in front of the store, freedom to navigate the world, freedom to bear arms. But obviously, for many people in this country, the crime is being black in this country, and that's a problem. And those are the facts.
And we have an independent caller this morning, David from LA. Good morning, David.
Yeah, good morning.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Miss Savali is just simply not being honest. You know, she's picking and choosing the facts she wants to believe.
Well, hold on. What is she saying that you think is dishonest, David?
The Alton, specifically the Alton Sterling shooting in front of the store. First of all, he was non-compliant. Second of all, that he was told several times to turn around, put his hands behind his back. He did not comply. He was tased. Even after being tased, he did not comply. And then I watched multiple videos on this. When he was on the ground, if you notice, he was still in non-compliant mode, and he reaching into his pocket where the gun was. He wasn't shot until that point. And even the officer, before he shot, he said, he's reaching for a gun. Stop, stop. And then he was shot. So this ruins credibility when the lady is criticizing the police department in this particular instance. And it really ruins her credibility and the greater public, because you have to disseminate the facts of each and every instance. And in many other cases, the cops were wrong. In this case, the cops were not wrong.
Let's hear from our guest in Houston.
Well, that's an interesting point, particularly because you called my honesty into question, and I've been covering this story since it happened. Alton Sterling was on the ground. He was shot 3 times, and he was shot 3 more times. Yes, he was tased multiple times. He was also then on the ground. There is no reason, none at all, why that should have led to a fatal encounter. I'm not really sure what your suggestion is as far as him posing a threat to Officer Blaine Salamone, but he entered into that encounter aggressive. He entered into that encounter saying he would shoot him in the head. Alton Sterling repeatedly said, "You are hurting my arm. What did I do? Tell me what I did." They never approached him as a human being. They approached him as someone who was a target. Those are the facts. And that is a problem that we see across this country. So we can narrow it down to Alton Sterling. We can talk about Stephon Clark. We can talk about Rakia Boyd. We can talk about, again, Samir Rice or Jordan Edwards or Jordan Davis or Charlene Lyles or Tarika Wilson. So many black people in this country who have been shot down by police officers. And it's because there's a devaluation of black lives, period. Period. We see all the time that police officers are able to de-escalate encounters with white people in this country, and that same thing does not happen with black people in this country. So it is not cherry picking at all. And we have to be honest about the fact that this is systemic, and it is continuous, and it happens all the time. And it happened with Alton Sterling as well.
Our guest, Kirsten West Savali in Houston, was educated at Alcorn State University as a BS in psychology, has previously worked as a columnist for Dame Magazine, editor at News One, contributing editor, and is a former senior news editor at yourblackworld.com. And again, she is in Houston, where she's currently social justice and education editor, associate editor at the Root. I wanted to ask you and get back to the issue of women of color. Here's a headline to a piece by Jonathan Capehart in the Washington Post, and it asks this question: police violence affects women of color just as much as men. Why don't we hear about it? How would you answer that question?
Well, we do hear about it. We don't hear about it enough. We don't hear about it enough from mainstream media. This is why Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw created Say Her Name as an intervention to the fact that most of the attention was placed on black men. But again, as I mentioned earlier, 60% of encounters with police officers, which are unarmed in the black community, the victims are black women. And again, sexual assault being the second highest reported form of police brutality, most of the victims being black and brown women in this country, black, brown, and poor women in this country. So it is absolutely something that we should be talking about. It is epidemic levels. We see it quite often, and it's all across the country.
Here is the youngest speaker at last weekend's March for Lives rally, 11-year-old Naomi Wadler of Alexandria, Virginia.
I am here today to represent Cortland Arrington. I am here today to represent Hadia Pendleton. I am here today to represent Tiana Thompson, who at just 16 was shot dead in her home here in Washington, D.C. I am here today to acknowledge and represent the African American girls whose stories don't make the front page of every national newspaper. Whose stories don't lead on the evening news. represent the African American women who are victims of gun violence, who are simply statistics instead of vibrant, beautiful girls that full of potential. It is my privilege to be here today. I am indeed full of privilege. My voice has been heard. I am here to acknowledge their stories, to say they matter, to say their names, because I can, and I was asked to be. For far too long, these names, these black girls and women, have been just numbers. I'm here to say never again for those girls too.
Kirsten West Savali in Houston, what do the words of that 11-year-old mean to this discussion?
That is so powerful. It's really powerful to hear her talk about that. It's really necessary to hear that message, and from such a young girl. You know, Aiyana Stanley Jones was 7 years old when she was shot and killed by a police officer who entered into her grandmother's home. Again, black women who founded, the Black Lives Matter movement. Black and queer people have always been at the forefront of movements for social justice in this country, and our stories are not told enough. They are not told enough. So it's a really important message. I hope that people hear it and receive it from her, because she should not have to live in fear either. She should not have to worry about what happens to her when she encounters police officers, and too often that is the case in this country.
Let's hear from George now. George is a Democrat calling from Louisville, Kentucky. Good morning to you, George.
Thank you very kindly. Nice to talk to you, Kirsten. From my viewing of the Alton Sterling viewing, it was completely different from what that other gentleman spoke of. But what I see is part of the problem is the police report writing seems to be a PR campaign for police after the fact. And I was kind of alarmed that the Ferguson, Missouri incident, the police report didn't come out till like 17 days after the fact. It kind of alarmed me that, and also I believe that it seems like it's poorer, lower income areas that get horrible justice in our community, whether it's public municipal services, our judicial system, how it treats people of lower income, and it specifically hurts people, black people, far worse than white people, and I've seen it. I've seen it nearly my whole life. And it seems to me also the type of people that are attracted to authority positions, bar bouncer, security position, police officer, so-and-so, are people with very abusive personalities to begin with. And there's not nearly enough policing of the police itself. And so we need independent sources to police the police on behalf of citizens to kind of referee these encounters. I hope Kirsten can make some commentary about that, and thank you very kindly.
Thank you. To our guest, so that idea of policing the police, Kirsten West Savali, what do you think about that, and how would it work?
Well, Patrice Kahn-Cullors was actually working on that in L.A. We saw that with Mayor Ras Baraka in Newark has also been working on that. Just an independent investigation of following their actions. Saying what they do. This entire system, we often say the entire system is guilty, and that is very true. So what he said about a PR campaign, we see that all the time. The Alton Sterling video, they had that video for 2 years, and Blaine Solomoni was still, of course he was on leave, but they didn't come out and say he was fired. They didn't come out and say, he should not be on the force or he went against their protocols. It took over 2 years. So we see that all the time with these police departments, and we absolutely need to be following them. Again, there needs to be a divestment from them. Just as we talk about the abolitions of prisons, there needs to be a complete drastic reduction of the power of police departments in this country. And one other thing he mentioned is that he's seen it as far as black and brown communities and how the justice or the injustice that they receive. This is all a continuation or a continuum of slavery. We see that slavery, convict leasing, sharecropping, black people didn't have the right to vote. We talk about segregated schools. Even now, we look back at Rahm Emanuel, who closed public schools in Chicago, which forced children to possibly go to busing, to try to bus to different neighborhoods. We see the charter school experiment in New Orleans where quote-unquote problem children were kind of cycled out of high-performing schools, and a lot of these children ended up on the streets or not going to schools. And that is also indicative of how Black lives in this country are devalued. So Angela Davis said something once about we should not really talk about mass incarceration. Of course we should, but we should also broaden that conversation to mass criminalization. So by the time there's an encounter with the police, there's already been a devaluation of that Black life. There's already been a bias that this person could be dangerous, this person could be criminal, this person is not worthy of the respect that they would possibly receive if they were in a higher income or if they weren't Black or brown in this country. So he's absolutely right about that.
What do you make of the proliferation of video in cases like these in recent years and the use of body cameras by police? Does video play a helpful role or maybe something else? What do you think?
It depends on what perspective you're looking at. We see that it causes a lot of trauma for a lot of people. To have to see people on the ground over and over again. As far as body cameras go, we have not really seen how that plays out as far as convictions. We're still seeing police departments make excuses. We have no idea why they cut off body cams. We've seen body cameras that are not working. When we file FOIA requests for these body cameras, there's always some kind of pushback. There's a reason why they can't release it to us. It's very, very difficult to say that this is something that would be beneficial for people in the long run because they still have their excuses. They still have their justifications. We see from your caller earlier with Alton Sterling, even though we saw him be shot, we saw the shooting and we saw him say he was stupid and we saw him say he was going to shoot him in the head and we saw him say that he just leave him on the ground. It didn't matter. Just leave him on the ground. There's always a justification for why that happened. Again, with Tamir Rice, we saw a 12-year-old boy, a drive-by of a 12-year-old boy. Less than 2 seconds, he was gunned down. And still, people have a reason to say why that was justifiable. We had body cameras, or cameras of Jonathan Crawford, who was standing there on a cell phone in Walmart, gunned down. And still, they said there was a justification. So I'm not really sure until we get to the root matter, which is a white supremacist system, a policing system, which is, again, a continuation of slave patrols in this country, a systemic devaluation of Black lives, that body cameras will not make a difference one way or the other.
We have time for a few more calls for our guest who is in Houston. The Boston University School of Public Health is one of those who keeps track of police violence. They have a map here at mappingpoliceviolence.org. That's a website. You can see the flashes out there at different parts of the country indicating where police shootings are happening. But to our next call, Teresa Gowan, Michigan, Republican. Hi there.
Hi.
Good morning.
I'd first like to comment about the clip you showed of Naomi Wadler.
Okay.
She was my favorite talker that day. I was very impressed. And about the kid in his backyard, I thought it was ridiculous, all them shots going off willy-nilly. I mean, it was so dark they couldn't see what they were shooting at. And the problem with people running when the police are trying to approach them, no wonder they get shot. But what I don't understand is why they're not shooting them in the leg just to bring them down so they can find out what the heck is going on. But they're always so interested in shooting to kill, it seems like. I just say bring them down. Eventually they're going to realize, they're not going to be a suicide by cop incident. It's going to be you're going to have to answer to what the heck you're doing.
Teresa, so question for our guest while we have him?
Down.
Okay. All right, let's get a reaction from Houston.
No, I mean, I can absolutely agree with that. There have been ways to de-escalate situations that we have not seen. With the Stephon Clark situation, again, they didn't even identify themselves. Alton Sterling, there was no reason for them to escalate to that point. So I absolutely agree with her. There has to be a way. And as far as running away, we also have to keep in mind, at this point, what do you do? What is the expectation for Black men and women, Black and brown women in this country to do when they encounter police officers? At this point, it is a danger. You don't know how that encounter ends. You don't know if you step the wrong way, if you're walking, if you're standing on a corner, if you're coming out of a store, if you're listening to music in your car, if you're playing in the park. What do you do? What makes your life valuable? What helps you walk away from that encounter alive? There is fear, there is trauma, and that needs to be addressed as well.
One last call for our guest, this one from Prescott, Arizona, independent caller. It's Mary. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
We're doing fine. Go ahead, please.
I'm calling in today because I have a few comments to make about this issue.
Okay.
First and foremost, it seems to be that our law enforcement officers are not held to a higher standard for what they do with their forearms. An individual that is a private citizen, if you shoot a police officer, even in self-defense, chances are your life is over. You will spend the rest of your days in prison. Why are they not held to that same responsibility? Same as our soldiers, when you're in battle, you are held to a code of conduct.
Mary, why don't you answer the question that you put out on the table first before we hear from our guests?
Which one would you like?
Well,
which would you like?
You said, why aren't they held to a higher standard?
Yeah, I don't understand why police officers get away with this on a consistent basis, and I don't believe it's just black individuals. I believe it's all Americans. I come from a mixed family. I'm scared to death for the mixed members in my family, yes, but also for the Caucasian members in my family.
That was Mary in Arizona. Kirsten West Savali, why don't you, if you could, respond to Mary's comments, and we have time for a final thought from you in this segment. Please go ahead.
A couple of things. Hi, Mary. I do agree with you. We saw that with Jeremy Martis, 6-year-old Jeremy Martis in Louisiana. White people, white children will absolutely be collateral damage in a white supremacist system that devalues black and brown lives. That is what the system is set up to do. So that will absolutely happen. And I understand that fear. To your point about it not just being black people in this country, that's absolutely true. But that's because the system is structured that way. It is a complete dehumanization of lives in this country that is set up to just basically police officers have that power. Martin Luther King also talked about the three evils of militarism, poverty, and capitalism. And we cannot really draw that distinction between the military and police departments because we see militarized police departments. We see the Ku Klux Klan infiltrating police departments. We see the same kind of weaponry, the same kind of we have the right to shoot to kill, the same kind of authority given to people in our military as we do with our police departments. So that kind of valorization of militarized might is, I think, influential on police departments in this country. So we really have to look at the whole picture when we talk about that.
Let's take a look at the website, theroot.com. You'll see the Stefan Clark and Alton Sterling stories being featured prominently there. What else will we find at the website?
Well, you will find a lot of things. Of course, we cover police brutality. We cover issues of black feminism, politics. We're taking a very close look at the Trump administration, but also we try our best to discuss the ending or the dismantling of two-party duopoly in this country and what's going on with the black left. I'm very careful about issues of that nature. We discuss black women's health, maternal morbidity in this country, which is really at epidemic levels, and also goes to show how black women's bodies and black women's lives are not valued in this country. And as far as one final thought on what we were discussing, as far as police brutality, we cannot have a gun control country in this country unless it includes police. We cannot talk about gun violence in this country unless it includes police. They absolutely have to be a part of this conversation, and what they do with that authority and that power has been dangerous for large segments of society, so that has to be a part of it.
Our guest has been Kirsten West Savali, who is Associate Editor for Social Justice and Education at The Root. Again, theroot.com is the place to go to read her work and those of others. Thank you very much for joining us this morning from Houston. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We will take a short break, and then we will come back with some open phones until the top of the hour, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. 202-748-8000. Democrats, Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002 is your number. You can respond to anything our guest has said this morning or anything we've talked